Captain Midnight.
This video is sponsored by Brilliant. Alright, cards on the table here. I desperately want the new Indiana Jones movie to be good. Watching Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade on VHS is one of my earliest movie memories, and I've watched and rewatched those first three films over and over. Honestly, nothing against Star Wars, but if I had to pick between the two old Lucasfilm heavy hitters, I'm taking Indy every time. So even though generally I feel pretty numb to the never-ending march of legacy sequels these days, this one I'm truly emotionally invested in. I love this character, I've been a Harrison Ford fan for about as long as I've been watching movies, and really, I don't want these movies to have to go out on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So with all that in mind, I approached the trailer for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny with a lot of nervousness, for a couple reasons. The first one is definitely the shallowest, so I'll just get that out of the way now. I do not like this title. It's not a huge deal or anything, but the Dial of Destiny, I don't know, sounds more like an Indiana Jones Game Boy game than an actual indie film. The other issue, and probably the far more important one, is that this is the first movie in the series not directed by Steven Spielberg. I'm pretty split on this. Spielberg's direction is obviously a massive part of what makes these movies work, and Raiders of the Lost Ark especially is just a masterclass in directing action set pieces. Everyone knows that movie was inspired by the adventure film serials that Spielberg and Lucas watched as children, but it's Spielberg's direction that elevates the film far above those influences. That being said, I'm not willing to write this one off just because he's not making it. For one thing, I think Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, despite a really entertaining first half, is one of his worst movies. And in general, I think the Spielberg of today is at his least interesting when he's trying to return to his blockbuster roots, as opposed to doing things like Bridge of Spies or trying out new genres he had yet to explore, like in West Side Story. If he doesn't feel like he has another Indiana Jones movie in him, obviously he shouldn't make one. James Mangold has directed films I enjoy, like Logan and the 2007 version of 3:10 to Yuma. Sure, he's had some misfires, but overall I think he's proved to be a really reliable, steady hand behind the camera, which I guess takes us to the trailer itself. I have already watched this thing so many times since it came out, and I think I'm pretty positive on it. Sure, there's some things that I'm worried about, like some of the effects look a little unconvincing, and that worries me after how much the bad CGI took me out of that back half of Crystal Skull. Indiana Jones has always been very effects heavy, but I think leaning on more practical effects maybe would have been the right move here, although I'll wait and see on that. I will say that I think the de-aging looks pretty solid, especially in motion. I've seen some people have problems with it, and I get that, it's not quite perfect, but I think they're reaching a really high bar here, especially since we're all so familiar with how Harrison Ford actually did look in those older films. And speaking of those older movies, it seems like Indy's past will have a really major role to play in this one. I'm curious to see just how much of the film takes place in the 40s, or if the trailer is just using a lot of clips of the few scenes that the de-aged Indy will be in. We already know that the plot of this one has to do with Nazis within NASA in 1969. And I'm guessing Indy will have had some run-ins with some of these figures in the past, which is where the flashbacks come in. And if I was to get cynical about it, I'd say that they're probably testing out just how okay audiences are with these de-aging effects. Disney has said they want to make more Indiana Jones movies after this one, and they don't want to recast. Obviously, Harrison Ford's not getting any younger, so I think it makes sense that they would want to test the waters for an entirely de-aged Indy movie down the line.
It's Indiana Jones, a large-size action figure.
That boulder's coming in fast!
He's new from Kenner's Raiders of the...
Going back to this movie though, I think it's worth taking stock of the cast. Alongside Ford, we get to see John Rhys-Davies return as Sala, Hannibal's Mads Mikkelsen and Logan's Boyd Holbrook as the villains, and Fleabag's Phoebe Waller-Bridge as Helena Brody, presumably the daughter of Marcus Brody from the earlier films. I really missed Marcus in Crystal Skull, honestly. Denholm Elliott's performance as the befuddled academic was always such a good foil for Harrison Ford, and their comedic chemistry managed to elevate the script whenever they were on screen together. So I'm glad the character hasn't been forgotten here. As for Helena Brody, I think it's still too early to tell. Waller-Bridge can be really funny if used well, and one thing the indie movies have always done a good job of is coming up with fun new supporting characters and giving them time to shine, whether it be Short Round or Indy's dad. So while I was not a fan of her in Solo, I'm hoping she fits the world of Indiana Jones a little more easily. Mikkelsen already seems like a good fit for an Indy bad guy. I mean, he's already played a Bond villain, so I really have no doubt that he can fill those shoes. I think a big part of being a great Indiana Jones villain is the smarm factor. Belloq from Raiders and Walter Donovan in Last Crusade both just radiate this smugness, and I know that's something that Mikkelsen can pull off with ease. But in everything I've talked about so far, I've yet to really address kind of the elephant in the room here, and that's Harrison Ford himself. The legendary leading man turned 80 this year, which does seem like it would make starring in an action movie pretty difficult. You know, despite coming from the mind of George Lucas, Indiana Jones is much more in the die-hard vein of movie franchises than Star Wars, in that so much of the film rests firmly on a single character and that actor's shoulders. What does Indiana Jones look like without Harrison Ford? Well, probably a pretty generic adventure movie. He's not like a deeply complex character whose layers just get peeled back more and more over time. That's not to say he has no depth at all, but he was always meant to be a straightforward hero, inspired by the even more straightforward heroes of the 30s. In other words, Harrison Ford's performance, his movie star qualities, kind of are the franchise. He has already played a much older Indy in Crystal Skull, and his action scenes could be pretty stiff at times. Obviously, it's very different to play an action hero when you're 39, which he was in Raiders, than when you're 80. From this trailer, it looks like he's going to be involved in plenty of high-speed chases and other action set pieces, and I just hope Mangold is able to handle those in such a way that don't make it feel too awkward on Harrison Ford's end. You know where Harrison Ford really does shine in this trailer though? That nice little comedic beat at the end where he realizes he brought a whip to a gunfight. Over the years, I'll admit that Ford has occasionally turned in some performances where he seemed very bored. I'm looking at you, Firewall. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one who remembers that movie even exists. That being said, I think he always shows up for Indiana Jones. That little comedic moment reminded me a lot of the humor in The Last Crusade, which I found really encouraging. The Indiana Jones movies have always been funny, with The Last Crusade especially placing a lot of emphasis on the jokes. But that style of humor feels completely different from the quip-a-minute, self-aware, bantery style of the MCU or a lot of modern Star Wars. And one of my big worries with Disney doing the film is that they'd inject a lot of that same sense of humor into it, which just wouldn't feel right for Indy. But I thought that little joke at the end of the trailer really did feel like Indiana Jones through and through, so I'm really hoping I can say the same about the rest of the film.
Watch him, Cairo, swordsman. Yeah, watch my swing. Yikes! All that.
And of course, there's one thing with this movie that just has to be acknowledged. That it will apparently be John Williams' final film before his retirement. Honestly, whether the film turns out to be great or terrible, this will probably be the single most noteworthy thing about it. We're talking about a composer who has been scoring movies since 1958's Daddy-O, who then went on to do Jaws, Superman, E.T., Jurassic Park. I could keep going, but come on, he's John Williams, you know who he is. His contributions to these movies are hard to overstate. They're kind of the perfect fit for him. It feels like he can compose something to make an action scene feel more exciting in his sleep, like he's great at that. But where he really shines on the indie scores is the sense of wonder and mystery his compositions bring to the table whenever the films call for it. I think one of the things that makes Indiana Jones special is that the movies do a great job of making the character both larger than life and just one guy playing a small part in these centuries-long religious stories of gods, knights, and buried treasure, which I think means that it plays to all of Williams' strengths. The marches, the exciting chase music, the moments where Indy is confronted with the supernatural or otherworldly, it all plays to his strengths of delivering distinct music that's memorable to people around the world. It's sad to face a future with no more new John Williams music, but at least he's going out on a film that I think will really allow him to shine, and I can't wait to hear it. At the end of the day, I'm cautiously optimistic about this one. I know there's every reason to be cynical about yet another Disney sequel, but I think this trailer is pretty promising. Nothing will ever be Raiders of the Lost Ark again, but I think that's okay. Whatever plans Disney has for this series down the line, it's clear that Ford can't keep playing the character forever. And if this does turn out to be his Indiana Jones swan song, I hope it's at least a worthy addition to a series of films that has always meant a lot to me. I tend to watch these movies a lot when I have the flu, or the first 3 at least. And I hope that when I'm sick 10 years from now and doing another rewatch, that it's just a no-brainer to include Dial of Destiny in the lineup. That may not sound like much, but really, I think that's what the Indiana Jones movies have always aspired to be. Pure escapism that sweeps you up in the adventure every step of the way. So for many, many years, I hated math about as much as Indy hates snakes. But thankfully, STEM topics aren't so scary anymore thanks to Brilliant. The one I always return to is everyday math, which hones my skills at the exact kind of math problems that used to really intimidate me. But where Brilliant shines is helping me discover the pace and style of learning that works for me specifically. It helps you tackle math, science, and computer science concepts in a highly interactive way. There's thousands of lessons here, with new ones being added constantly. And spending just 30 minutes a day or so on them is both really fun and builds your skills, without any of the stress that you might remember associating with these topics. Plus, with Brilliant, you can really learn and dig into this stuff without having to break the bank or take out some loan. So go to brilliant.org/midnight and try it for free. And the first 200 people to go to that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes, too.